So without further ado, I'm going to pass the word to Camille Lorenz and to the panel Learning from Failure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And I'd like to start thanking the organization. Excellent organization, as last time we met at Fundação Champalimaud for this event. And we're going to talk about failure today. And what a moment to talk about that, because first of all, we have this financial crisis, which translated into an economic crisis lately. And this is probably the most appropriate moment to talk about that, especially in Portugal. Because as people are getting unemployed, there's a chance here. Do you have an idea? Do you want to do something? Do you want to create a business? Do you want to create value? This is probably one of the most important driving forces behind this. But the point is, entrepreneurship is always something dangerous. As I used to put it in Portugal, being an entrepreneur or being a businessman is more dangerous than being a tourist at the Gaza Strip in the Middle East. So it's very dangerous, it's tough, it's difficult, but we have to face it. Entrepreneurship comes with the possibility of failure. Of course, we can try to reduce the odds or the possibilities that will lead to failure, but eventually we'll fail one day. And the question is, what are we going to do about that? Take it as an example, as a lesson, as something we can learn from it, or feel depressed and think, well, this is not for me. And the fact is, the most important businessmen or entrepreneurs in life, and we have known over the last decades, are people who had their failures. And they did not give up. They did not stop there. They tried and tried and tried again. And talking about failure, let me show you a couple of cover stories, all from Business Week magazine. I'm a journalist, so I try to look at journalism from this perspective. This is one cover story from Business Week calling this guy, Eddie Lampert, the next Warren Buffett. Did you hear about him lately? No. What about this? Will sun rise again? Another cover story. And this, customer service champs. How many of them are current customer service champs? They took serious risks running these cover stories, but the fact is they tried. And it's, and what about this? Can anything stop Toyota? Yes, it can. What was it? Toyota itself. Not the market, not the other brands. Actually, I thought they would rise very fast to the top of the world in terms of car makers ranking. What happened? Their own mistakes led them to failure. And this is a different story. Steve Jobs himself, someone who had several failures over his life, and also this guy. And I remember one day talking to Paulo Azevedo, who leads Sonai in Portugal, the son of Mr. Belmiro de Azevedo. And he was telling me one day, listen, Camilo, you journalists have no idea how many projects we launch every year and how many of them fail. And actually, just a couple of them who are successful comes to light. And you guys, you journalists, concentrate on them. This is a lesson we have to take. You know, failure is always present when we try to innovate, when we try to create, or when we try to start something new. And this is what we're talking about. What do you have to do when you're faced with failure? Well, two things can happen. Either you forget it, or you give up, or you fight, learning from mistakes. And this is what we have to face, because in Portugal, as you know, it's very difficult to face failure. Someone points a finger at you saying, you know, he went bankrupt one day. And the fact is, I've known some of the best professionals in my professional life, and they come from failures, personal failures and also entrepreneurship failures. And they end up being excellent professionals, they end up being excellent entrepreneurs later. Why? Because they learn from it. And this is the this is the key issue here. If you, especially for you who are thinking about creating something, the main point here is, praise failure, encourage failure, and most of all, most important of all, reward failure. And please don't forget about something. Shoot for the fucking stars. Thank you very much. We're going to have two excellent speakers here, Patrick and John. We're going to start with John, and then we'll proceed to Paulo and then Patrick.
Great. Thank you, guys. Can you hear me all right like this? I have no slides, so I'm fine. I have no slides. So I'm going to take it even one step further, and I'm going to say that you explicitly, that failure should be your goal, should be your target. And why is that? That sounds crazy, right? But I'll tell you this, I will submit this. The alternative to failure is mediocrity. All right? Those are your two choices. You can either be failing every day, or you can be incredibly boring and normal. Right? Those are your two choices. And you get what, 80, 90, maybe if you're lucky, 100 years to live on this planet in which you can understand who you are, exist within your ecosystem, and strive for something. And I will submit that mediocrity is the least attractive option of all of those that you could choose to implement in that lifetime. I would rather be eaten by a lion than die a mediocre, boring, ordinary person. All right? And the way that you know that you are not mediocre and boring and ordinary is that you are failing. Failing is the way that you determine the boundary of your capabilities. That is proof that you are executing at the limits of your capacity. And it is what makes you strong. Think about like the strongest individual that you've ever met or seen. Somebody with huge rippling muscles, incredibly physically fit and capable in a physical way. What makes somebody strong? Like, what is it that they do? How do you get strong? They wake up every morning and they imply constant, intense resistance to their body. They lift impossibly heavy things. They run impossibly long distances until they are out of breath, their heart is beating, they are covered in sweat, and their body is shaking from the trauma of doing something that difficult. And that is what makes you strong. So failure is exercise for your soul. This is what enables you to expand your capabilities as a human being and to realize yourself in the world. And entrepreneurship is the greatest thing that you can do for yourself because it forces you to fail in every aspect of your being. You can take a job at a big company and you can quietly be boring in a corner for the entire life, right? And you can make some mistakes that nobody will care, they'll get glossed over and lost, and you'll just be ordinary and fine. If you go to a startup, you are the marketing team, the HR team, the IT team, the strategic team, the finance team. You have to do every aspect of that business. And I'll tell you right now, you're going to suck at it. It's hard. Right? It's really hard to be that good at all of those aspects of the business. And there are costs to screwing it up that are very immediately readily available to you. But it is like deciding that you're going to be a triathlete. Right? If you're not already physically fit, it's really, really hard, but you get better and better at it by failing. So it's absolutely critical, and I would say that is what you want to target, okay? So I actually will advocate integrating failure into your daily lives as a specific goal, and I will say this, that it's not uncommon that I will achieve 4 or 5 impossible things by breakfast, and that typically involves failing at 10 or 12 things first. Right? And that's how you know you're reaching the limits of your boundaries. So let me give you a couple of quick anecdotes about failure. One more point actually first is that the other thing is that failure today costs you less automatically than failure in 2 years. All right? So you can learn from the failure now, and whatever you're doing in the world right now, failure today is less costly than failure later. And so you in fact want to be failing as quickly as you can. As long as you're examining what is causing the failure and you're learning from it and improving and becoming stronger, then that will automatically be a benefit to you. So I would say fail as fast as you can and learn from it and then get better. So I'll give you a couple of examples of this. So one, I was a swimmer in college. I'm not a particularly athletic guy. I broke my foot dancing, so that's a sign that I am no longer that physically fit. But when I was in college, I was a swimmer. I was on the swim team. And I was a terrible swimmer. I was really bad. There was one other person who was worse than me. was a Spanish guy, Olivier, and he was very, very hairy. And actually, when we had our final swim meet, he completely shaved his body, and then I was the worst one on the team. He gained like a full 2 seconds on his time and blew me out of the water. So he was actually, wearing a fur coat. Basically, was why I was faster than him. But anyways, I was so bad at swimming that even the way that it worked at I was at a small college, and the way that you made the team is you just didn't leave practice. As long as you completed practice, then you were allowed to stay on the team. And if you left practice halfway through, then you were cut from the team. That was the rule. So I stayed and I suffered my way through it. And I was terrible. Like they would be like, raise your hand after we do some sprints. Raise your hand. Whose pulse is above 70, above 80, above 90? And get to like 160, and it would be me. Just me left, going, just like dying in the corner. And they actually took me out of the men's group, and I used to practice with the girls because I couldn't. And even with the girls, I was the last one in the girls' lane, right? And even then, I was still getting 160 after the sprints, right? Almost dying. So I was terrible. And during the races, I didn't like, there would be 3 heats, is what you call it. There'd be like a whole group that would race for actual points. Then there would be an exhibition group that would just race for practice, but it didn't count towards the actual outcome of the meet. And then there would be the third race, which would be me, and then like 2 really overweight guys from the other school. And we'd just be the 3 of us, and everybody would be out like talking and chatting to each other and wouldn't even watch our part of the race. So it was very bad. But I stuck through it the whole time, and I got some respect from the coach and the team and the rest of the team for sort of sticking with it the whole time and not giving up. So after 4 years of college, it's the very, very last swim meet of my career at Bowdoin, and we're swimming against MIT, which later I would go and attend MIT, but this was when I was still at this other small school. And MIT was the best in our division. They were way dominant over us, a much larger school. We had 1,500 total students, and they had tens of thousands of students, almost 20,000 students, right? So totally larger pool to draw off of, much better swimmers. And they were a little bit arrogant about it, so they didn't swim their good swimmers against us during the whole course of the meet. And the way the swimming meets work is in the final relay, if you win, you get more points than second, third, fourth combined. So as long as you win, you get the most points. You can't make it up by getting second, third, and fourth together or something like that. So, and if we would win this final relay, then we would win the meet. And that would be the first time that we had beaten MIT in like 20 years. And so people were getting super excited because we were a pretty bad team, but we had a couple really good swimmers, and we had a realistic shot of winning that final heat. And so the coach pulls everybody in, and he's like, all right, he's calling out the names. I want you there. You're going to swim anchor. And swim meets, I don't know if you've been to them, they're intense events. Really muscly people screaming at each other, go, yeah, we're going to do it. Like really intense, like face rippling, screaming. And he points out everybody, and he calls me over and he says, John, I want you to swim in this heat. And I was like, yeah, in the exhibition or something. Yeah, I got it. That's cool. This is great. This will be funny. He's like, no, I want you in the main, on the main team. And I was like, don't we want to win? Because I thought that was what we were all excited about. And he's like, no, you've been here for 4 years. I think you've got it. Your time is good. I think we can make it. We can win this. And I'm like, I'm all nervous. We start swimming, and our first 2 guys are ahead. They're like, when it comes to me, I'm the third guy. Is always the worst position out of 4 in the relay. And so I'm up on the block, people screaming in my head, everybody screaming, people are going nuts, clapping. And our guy is like a solid body length ahead of the MIT guy, and I know our anchor is the best, so he can catch up. So all I have to do is not lose more than a body length in going there and back. And so I'm getting all fired up, I'm like getting all psyched up, put my goggles on, and I get a good jump, I get up in the air, and I'm like, that was a good jump, I'm doing great. I hit the water, boom, my goggles fall off, and right in my mouth. And I'm like, whoa, but I can't see anything at all. I'm totally blind, and I can't breathe well either because I have goggles in my mouth. But I can't stop and take them out because I can't stop swimming. So I'm just plowing as fast as I can, and I get to the other side, and I just bam right into the wall, just face first. Oh, spin over, flip back, like you go back, and I make the next couple of turns, and I'm just going as fast as I can. I touch the wall, our guy dives in, and it's incredibly close, neck and neck, and we lose by 2/100ths of a second. Like that is a touch. That is like a difference of like that much, and we lost. All right, and my goggles fell off my face like that. I slammed into the wall. That was definitely 2/100ths of a second that I lost, and so that haunts me still. Like there are times when I wake up at night and I'm like, fuck, I can't believe that. Like I'm such a loser. I can't believe I didn't like just tighten my goggles. I didn't think of that one detail. I got all lost in the hype and excitement of it. And it still haunts me today. And now today, I'm incredibly detail-oriented before a really important event, and I make sure that I tighten my goggles. And we have at Mass Challenge a saying that we're like, don't make this a goggles incident, man. I don't want to have that happen, right? Like, so I've learned from that and I've moved on, and now I've solved the goggle problem. All right? And so now I consciously strive to push myself to a point where I'm likely to fail, embrace it. And this will be my last thing, and I'll pass it on. But so we just recently ran our award ceremony for Mass Challenge. We run the world's largest startup competition, and we have an affiliation with the White House, and President Obama in January highlighted us as one of the top 10 initiatives in the country for supporting high-growth entrepreneurs in the United States. And there's this huge push for jobs, and we have 125 startups that we're supporting. And so we're trying to get the president to come and speak at our ceremony. You guys pulled it off. We did not pull it off at the end of the day. But we put in a really good ask, and apparently the president is pretty busy. I don't know. That's what they say. But we tried to get him really hard, and I put a long push in for months and months. I was on the phone with the White House. I was sending slide decks about why it's the right thing to do, who would be in the audience, how we could broadcast it, how it would tie into his upcoming campaign and everything, trying to sell this thing. And he didn't come. And so I failed to get that speaker. But I had a long list of great alternative speakers, and at the end of the day, this was widely hailed in Massachusetts as the greatest event surrounding entrepreneurship on the East Coast this entire year. And it was a huge, incredible success. But I didn't succeed at every aspect of it. I tried 1,000 things surrounding that conference that didn't work, but at the end of the day, it was still a huge success. And that's only because I was trying impossible things. And if you're not trying, if you're trying impossible things and you fail and only get 50% of the way there, it's still better than anything anybody else is doing. And that's the key, is that failure is an indication that you are trying something worthwhile. And that is how you know and can measure and can prove it. So you want to be failing every single day. You want to fail at 5 or 6 things before breakfast, and that means you're growing and you're getting better, and you will not die a mediocre person. All right, but watch out for the lions and be careful when you're dancing. Those are my 2 points of wisdom. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Very inspiring. Swimming. Paulo Rosado from OutSystems. Want to use mine? Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Wow, this is. When I'm talking in panels with folks from the United States, I always feel like the monkeys that came after the Beatles in the Johnny Carson show. I mean, no one wanted to come after the Beatles, and so they put a bunch of monkeys just exchanging bananas after that show. So I'm really going to try to to make up and not lower the quality of the presentations. I'm going to actually talk about failure at a much larger scale than what John did. I mean, not personal failure, but failure as a company. And I think Patrick will follow up with an even larger scale of failure. But what I'm going to talk about is the fact that is the inevitability of failure inside an organization that wants to thrive. And why is that? There is really no alternative. Closer? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I usually don't do the Britney Spears position, so I'm not used to this. But the problem with being in a market that you don't know is that you have absolutely no visibility of what's following. And when you don't have no visibility and you don't want to copy anyone else because you basically stuck and you need to create some form of differentiation, you basically are walking blindly. And so what we did at OutSystems, we're very risk averse. It's actually, I think it's wrong to say that entrepreneurs are risk takers. I think entrepreneurs are actually very risk averse. What they realize is that they are threading in unknown waters, and they try to lower that risk as much as possible. And so as an organization, what the hell is going on here? As an organization, without any experience, failure is inevitable. And so my whole talk here, it's about the mechanisms in a very short amount of time. This is actually part of a series of lectures we do at OutSystems and a part of our training process in the organization, is that we try to give mechanisms and frameworks to people so that they fail with the least cost possible. And this comes out of this observation, is that good decisions come from experience, but experience comes from bad decisions. And so there is really no way around it. You're going to make bad decisions, you're going to fail, and the only trick that you can do here is basically try to fail fast and fail cheap, okay? So it's pretty obvious, but as an engineer, I like to always plot graphs around these things. And this graph was actually taken, the black one, was taken from a blog from a guru of marketing called Seth Godin. And he actually plotted that black line there, where it says that if you take a small amount of risk, okay, the reward is going to be half, as if you take exponentially a large amount of risk. The organizations or the people who take large amount of risk, actually that do things in a big bang way, which they put a lot of investments, they plan a lot up front, and then they go and do it, are actually increasing the amount of bets they do on the unknown. So at OutSystems, what we do is we've made it almost as part of the DNA of the company to actually introduce the notion of iterations and learning and constantly doing things by fastly failing into small iterations, or what we call small sprints. And the big trick here is, whenever you do, instead of you planning a very large program or project or activity, putting a lot of money on it, if you put a little bit of money, if you put a very good SWAT team working on your project, and then having these guys do a checkpoint 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or even 3 months down the line, at that point, you can evaluate whether it's worth going along and getting into the next 3 months, or basically just giving up. And that's failure. Failure means, in a sense, giving up at those checkpoints. But by doing that, at every point, you have the choice to fail, but you also have the choice to change your way about it. And by changing your way about it, you actually improve visibility, or you correct your way. By correcting your way, you're actually constantly lowering the risk that comes out of and maximizing the eventual reward that comes out of it. And that's why at OutSystems, we're very, very scared of the failure, the ultimate failure, which is the failure of bankrupting the company, but we're not afraid of the small failure. That's our everyday life. Now, one of the things that hampers you when you're very much afraid of failure is that it tends to clog your decision-making process. And by clogging your decision-making process, you delay it. By delaying it, you're actually increasing the odds that your risk is going to be higher. You increase the bets. And so what we figured out at OutSystems is whether you have few information or a lot of information, you have to decide fast. There is a timeout for decisions where if you don't decide, we just cut off the project. It means that we fail. So long decisions at OutSystems are considered failures outright. Now, as a company, how do we pass this type of frameworks to the overall, to the leaders of the company? We are about 140 at this point. How do we do that? How do we do this as a culture? We created this little framework where the decision-making process, or these little sprints, are always started or prefixed by an activity where we gather as much as context as we can. There's always enough context or some context that we can gather. We define exactly what we're trying to achieve. We call these ultimate goals. And then we plot courses of action. When we gather as much context as possible, this goes in line with a lot of the learnings we are doing here in this conference. For instance, the de-syncing. Context for us is about communication and about emphasize. If, for instance, we're going after a new product line, we go and talk with customers. We need to understand what they do. If we're doing something internally, like a training, we need to understand what our people need. If we're hiring an executive and we're trying to sell OutSystems to this executive because the guy is really good, we need to understand how does this executive think about, what does he value. So there's a lot of situations where this gathering a context really is an emphaticization exercise. So we do that as training. We use it at OutSystems consistently. The second thing is defining the ultimate goals. This is actually a very, very tough exercise. An ultimate goal at OutSystems is a problem as much as possible devoid of a solution. What we've tried to do as much as possible is engineers, and 80% of OutSystems are engineers. Engineers are horrendously good at solving problems. And they've learned for 5 years that their purpose in life is to solve problems. What we try as leaders, for instance, when we lead a team, what we try to do is extract that solving problem capability out of the leader. And that might sound weird, but by doing that, we force the leader to focus on the ultimate goals. Why are we doing something? Is it still worth it? Why are we doing it? And by stripping it out of the solution, we actually create an essence of a problem where the solution is now being devised by the team. Okay? So by doing that, we have the leaders passing the ultimate goals, then the team coming out of the solutions. And out of that, that's where we get a lot of out-of-the-box thinking and a lot of innovation coming from the bottom up. All of this is very easy to do in your head. It's very difficult to do in an organization that's growing by leaps and bounds in terms of people and where we're hiring constantly. And finally, we do something that's very unnatural for Portuguese. We actually believe that big problems have actually small solutions, most of them. Now, the typical mentality in Portugal is that a big problem requires a very, very, very large solution. And that's why we have sentences like, oh, this is complicated. You don't understand. You're not getting it. It's really complicated. And then people get stuck, you know? No. What we figured out, which is something that the Nordic countries have already discovered for 200 years, is that actually there is a rule in the course of actions that you do. It's the Pareto rule. It's the 80-20 rule. And what we try to do at OutSystems is whenever we plot a course of action, because we have a sprint, we have 3 months, we have a time box of time we can do these projects, what we do is we try to always prioritize, put in a bullet list, prioritize what is our course of action. We can do 10 things. Let's do the 3 that are most important. And the trick here is, how do you do the 3 that are most important? You do the 3 that are most important because you have the ultimate goals and the context to help you prioritize. And that's why the 2 former exercises are so important. So, this is the framework. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example of an exercise we did at OutSystems. This is a big thing, but at about 2.5 years ago, we decided to change the nature, the market nature of the company for several reasons. There's a lot of context here. I'm not going to go into details. But we wanted to grow our sales, which was, we sold between 60 to 100 new customers per year. We wanted to change it to thousands of transactions per year, to thousands of new customers per year. Our cost of sales was very, very high. We had at least 5 meetings with pre-sales, and we wanted to lower that. And this process was, the reason why we wanted to do this process is because we wanted to speed up internationalization. Today, this cost of sales was hampering our expansion. And so what did we do as an execution? This was actually broken in those sprints, but I'm going to simplify the process here. We actually introduced a freemium model with a free version, and then you upgrade to a premium. We lower our entry price so that we can increase volume. And we change our product by investing more than 1 million in making the product sell itself. The product was very complex to operate in the beginning. We made it really easy. What failed? And a lot of stuff failed. It's always like this. First of all, and in inside, it's very obvious. And you guys can think this guy's really stupid to do that. But the fact of the matter is, without the benefit of looking at the future, of knowing the future, you're really kind of blind. And so what happens is that the cell-free model does not work for our type of enterprise segment. And so that particular objective was not really true. We figured out after measuring, after being in the market, that it didn't work. Actually, the lower entry price cannibalized a lot of our sales. So our sales had a drop because of our small entry price. But what worked is that we removed dramatically the cost of sales. And we figured out that by doing the product became much easier. It became an evaluation tool. And suddenly our enterprise market took off because of those two things. But now, we iterated and realized that we had to actually correct some stuff. And so we removed the entry-level price. It's still cheaper, but not as cheap as we had it before. And we actually realized that we cannot sell international without having bodies, warm bodies and physical eyeballs in the territories. And so we changed our channel model for this to distributors. Now, what is the uptake of this? Failure in real life is not complete. No? Okay. Failure in an organization of this level, if you do it iteratively, is never definite. There's pieces that succeed and pieces that fail. Okay? And what you need to do is actually shove off and cut off the stuff that fails. Reuse, look back into what you did, and go back and iterate on top of what you did. Okay? So cut fast, fail fast, iterate, and go to the next one. And you're going to fail again, half of it probably, most likely, hopefully. But then you're going to continue, and in success, it's success. The success is piling up after 10 years, become a big success. But they always pay with failure. Thank you.
Patrick, it's your turn.
Can you guys hear me? Hi there. So, for 1 second, let's talk about success. I hear Portugal kicked Bosnia's ass to get into the European Championships 2012. So, congratulations to the nation of Portugal. Where's Sophia? Sophia's right there. So I spoke to Sophia over Skype a few months ago about this conference. She was very kind and she invited me, and we talked about my experiences as an entrepreneur, and she thought that it would be worth to share sort of my experiences with failure. And I wanted to sort of connect my personal experiences, what I think mattered, and how I think it actually relates to European and Portuguese culture in terms of failure. And after all, this conference is called Silicon Valley Comes to Lisbon. And Silicon Valley really isn't a place, it's a mindset, it's a framework, and it's a way of how we think about success and failure. And my first startup I did with a friend of mine was quite funny. We did everything wrong. We thought we were super smart. We hung out and we worked together on these desks facing each other. We never talked to who we thought our clients were. We just copied stupid features from other cool sites. We had this mishmash of garbage, and we wasted a lot of time and money. But to be honest, we wasted time and money, and it was a failure, and we never actually really launched a meaningful product. But to be honest, that really didn't hurt that much. It was a failure, and we failed. That didn't really hurt that much. But what I think is meaningful around failure, and I think this is something, and I'm not familiar with Portuguese culture, but I'm familiar with other European cultures, notably Hungarian. My parents are Hungarian immigrants to the United States, and so I actually have a dual passport and many relatives in Hungary. And one of the reasons my father actually left Europe and went to the United States is because of the differences of how generally Europeans feel about failure in business and Americans feel about it. And the big difference, I think, is actually that often Europeans, and I'm generalizing here, of course, but often Europeans look at business failure as a moral failing. Like, you fail in business, you're a bad person, right? Is this something that, would you say that Portuguese culture shares those kind of feelings? You guys tell me. I don't know. I'm not Portuguese. I don't speak Portuguese. I don't know. I see people nodding, right? So you certainly don't see that in the Bay Area, and you certainly don't see that in Silicon Valley. And so my second startup, we actually did a lot more things right. We actually, by that time, I had read Steve Blank's book, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, and we started getting out of the building, doing some customer development, doing some testing. And we actually did quite a little bit better the second time around. And we had a mentor who was a really great person, spending a lot of time with us. He asked for nothing. He didn't ask for any equity or money, and he was really pushing us forward, put us in front of really great investors. We had great conversations. He was really extending his social capital to help us out just because he liked us. And I don't know if, who here actually is in a startup right now? Anyone? No one? Anyone have a co-founder? You ever argue with your co-founder? Yeah. So we would have these battles, my co-founder and I would have these battles, and ultimately we couldn't resolve them. And we had this very, 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 very acrimonious split. And I'm talking like lawyers involved and like just angry words and yelling. It was horrible. And ultimately ended up failing, and I went back to this mentor, and I was very ashamed. I felt like a bad person. I felt like I had done something bad. I'd like I'd broken the law, or I had, failed him. And I remember my wife was disappointed. I was very disappointed myself. I'd made promises to friends and acquaintances and actually investors, potential investors. And I felt horrible. So I had to go break the news to this mentor friend of ours. I said, look, this guy and I, we couldn't get along, and now we have this lawsuit and all this stuff, and I kind of hung my head, and I expected him to chastise me, because I was a bad person. I really fucked this thing up. But he didn't. He goes, welcome to the club. Like, this is your first lawsuit. You're going to see many more of these. This is the price of doing business. You're in startups. And he just kind of gave me a pat on the shoulder and goes, okay, what's next? What are we doing next? And it was such a relief to me that this person who had spent a lot of time assisting me, helping me out, didn't judge me as a bad person. It was tremendous. I mean, this guy had spent time and money on my behalf just because he liked us, he liked our idea, he liked what we were doing. And when I told him we had fucked it up, he didn't punish me, he didn't castigate me, he didn't ostracize me. He patted me on the back and said, happens all the time, buck up. And there's a saying in English, and it's very cliche, and it's very, in English you would say cheesy, which means it's very saccharine, it's very sweet. But there's a saying, it's quite true, whatever doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. And failure is very much like that. And in terms of, my lesson learned is, when you fail, it doesn't mean you're a bad person at all. And this is something from my talks with the Portuguese entrepreneurs last night, that this is, I think, a problem in Portugal and in all of Europe versus the United States. And not to say that the United States is a perfect place or utopia, and if I fail, people give me high fives, like, good job, you failed, awesome, right? But there's no, generally speaking, there's no stigma. There's no stigma, and in some cases it's celebrated. And I think that's very important. I'm not sure how to change that in Europe or in Portugal. I would leave that on to you. But I would urge all of you to hold that in your heart, that when you do fail, when you do get punched in the face, and you do fall and you hit the ground, and you have to get up, and sometimes your best friends and sometimes your wife or your husband or your parents aren't there to support you, and at first you got to get up and you got to keep fighting. And for me, again, it wasn't the money and the time that bothered me so much. It was this feeling that I had been a bad person, but I really hadn't been. So when you do fail, you're not bad. And I would really want you guys to take that away from this and perhaps change entrepreneurial culture here in Portugal. That was really sort of how I wanted to connect my personal story with what you guys are going through here. And I actually have a video, what I'm going to finish with. Let's see if I can find it here. Is there sound out on this? So this is actually I can. Yeah. So this is actually there's a American radio journalist named Ira Glass. He's very well respected. He's got a national radio show, and he has these series of talks on storytelling. And he's talking about the creative process. And while he's specifically talking about storytelling, this is equally applicable to startups. And I just want to end with this in terms of how he frames a failure in getting better, and hopefully leave you a little bit inspired. We're just going to watch about two minutes of this. Real quick, to sum up what Ira's saying is that failure is part of the creative process, and whether that's doing a radio show or doing a startup, the only way you actually get better is actually failing, repeatedly, and like Paulo was saying, is failing fast, and getting up and doing it again. And I'll leave you with that. It's not a moral failing to fail in business. So anyway, I hope that helped you, and hope we can change Portuguese business culture, and hand it over to Camilo.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, we have 5 minutes to ask people from the audience whether they have any questions or statements or insults. The guy over there, please.
Hello. Both John and Paulo talked about failing fast. So my question is there a time to quit and to say, okay, I failed, now it's time to move on? How do you know that time has come? When do you know that it's time to wrap it up as a failure or to keep pushing it?
Wants to start, Paulo or Patrick?
I can start.
That is the question, actually.
That's the $15 million question. Actually, if you gather as much as context as possible about something, if you do what this gentleman here, for instance, preaches, go outside, talk with people, do the customer development methodology, it becomes more obvious when you need to move out. The one thing, though, that you need to be aware is that entrepreneurs have a big ego. Okay? And successful entrepreneurs have mastered the trade-off between being humble and saying, I made a mistake, and having a big ego. They need to be persistent also. So it's a big trade-off here that only can be unlocked by experience or by knowledge. So sometimes you're going to fail, but as you fail more and more, the intuition will grow, experience will grow, and your decisions are going to be better. So it's experience.
So it is an excellent question. I don't have a really simple answer. But I would, I'm almost addicted to just doing stuff. So I actually don't really ever give up. I just kind of continue to sort of change the thing that I'm doing if it's not working. And what I would say is I typically will just seek out almost naturally, almost without thought, the path of least resistance. And so if something is giving you enormous difficulty over a very long period of time, and you are finding an easier path towards success in another area, then typically I will just shift my resources and attention towards that easier path. So but I'm typically doing 5 or 6 things at a time, so dropping any one of them doesn't really mean that I'm canceling everything that I do. So I'm just kind of you morph the nature of the beast over time so that it becomes more dominated by the other 4 activities or 3 activities or 2 until you really have crystallized something that's awesome and winning. So like we were looking at doing a reality show for Mass Challenge. We have all these startups. We were approached by producers, and that would give us great national and potentially international exposure. And our original hypothesis was there would be money in it, and we would have this great creative control, and it would be all exciting and fun. And the more we got into it, the more we realized that industry is just screwed up. It's like dominated by 4 people or 5 people that control all of the eyeballs in the country. They demand editorial control. They give you $0. They will name the show whatever whatever the heck they want. They will inject scandal and anger and frustration into it. And then at the end, you're like, why would we do this again? Like, at the end, it will have nothing to do with us. We will get zero money, and there will be publicity, but not about us or anything that we would like to say about us, and it will be bad for our startups because you will make them fight each other on national television. Yeah, that's not that exciting anymore. And so we kind of have turned away from that and looked at other alternative models at getting that publicity over time. But it doesn't feel like it gave up on that thing. It just proved itself to be ugly and bad, and so I just turned away to something else. So I don't know, but I would say you just sort of feel that there's an easier, better opportunity somewhere else. So just constantly seek out opportunity and constantly weigh them against each other and go with the one that's the best and biggest. Sometimes you got to tough it out, so it's a challenge to find that point.
I don't have a very glib answer to this, but doesn't mean I can't try. I guess at some point when the feedback you get is no longer meaningful, right? So people have talked about how failure is feedback, and if you're getting this feedback and you actually aren't learning from it, maybe it's time to try something else. It's such a complicated question, and it really is the question. I feel
another good distinction actually to draw. One other quick distinction to draw here is that there's a difference between being effective and being right. And it's really important to understand that line, and that people will typically start something because they feel that there's an attachment to that thing. Once you've created something, you feel attached to it. It's yours. You're associated with that thing. And you don't want to walk away and say it's a failure because that becomes associated with you on a moral level. You feel like the thing that I created sucked, and that means I suck. I'm no good. People won't like me. And so there's this intent to be right about the original intention to launch that thing, which is to maintain it in perpetuity. But what you have to realize is that you launched that thing to accomplish a goal. And if that thing is no longer accomplishing that goal or addressing that goal, then it's no longer an effective strategy for you, and it will no longer be in alignment with you and what you want, your goals and values. So I constantly have to ask myself, am I just fighting this cause because I want to be right and I want the world to think so that I look good? Or is it actually serving some purpose that's valuable to me? And that is often, over time, you'll find that you'll be propping up some dumb idea because it makes you feel like you're going to look good at the end of it, and it actually is not serving a real purpose, and then you know that you can kill that one off.
There's something that may help you. Try to find 2 or 3 people outside the project who are constantly looking at it, and build a grid with several topics and go over them regularly. But especially use those people as snipers. They are looking at the project from the outside, and they can see things that you don't because you're too involved in operational issues. And that makes a big difference. Because sometimes failure comes from a succession of mistakes. And if you have someone outside who's looking at you and saying, maybe you should do this a different way, or we should change that, it makes a huge difference because you won't accumulate mistakes. You can correct still in time, because that's when a failure occurs. Anyone else? Can you be quick, okay? Because you're running out of time.
Thank you. I'll be really quick. Cost of failure, when you're trying to make a decision, especially a critical decision that you understand will have some impact, do you calculate that cost of failure? Is it the opportunity cost of not doing it, or you just follow your gut feeling? Does it hamper a fast decision, as you were saying, Paulo? What's the strategy? Do you have something?
I never calculate the cost of failure. I never start with something with the objective of failing. But the way we do it is by putting very simple boundaries around for how long are you trying it. I mean, in terms of this method that we use, we really set up a collection of milestones that have fixed dates. And that thing basically, there's always 2 constraints that we put in this type of exercises. One is time and the other is budget. So here you have 5,000 euros and here you have 12 weeks. Go and do something with it. That's the objective, and let's measure and check out after 3 months. And there you have your boundaries, basically. And so the cost of failure in terms of opportunity, we don't do any of that. There's no way we would do something like that.
Dovetailing on what Paolo just said, and I think he said something very insightful about not concentrating on the failure. And I have this theory that as an entrepreneur, you can either have the choice of being a warrior or a foot soldier. And the difference is that a warrior goes into battle focusing on the outcome of the battle. They want to win the battle. They know they're at risk, but the outcome is, how do I achieve my goals? How do I get through these obstacles? How do I defeat the enemy? A foot soldier goes into battle, and the first thing they think is, how do I not get hurt? And it's a radically different mindset. And look, as we're human, and the warrior and the foot soldier is part of. They're both part of us. But if the objective is how to avoid failure, I think it sort of leads to failure, if that makes sense.
I see that's a very, very good point. I do, if I'm looking at a scenario, I will calculate, we're main focused on the outcome, and you want a very large goal, which often will involve the possibility of a pretty significant risk, right? They are related, risk and reward. But oftentimes you can do a sort of a pilot or a test. There's a lot of this sort of the lean startup methodology even itself is a lot of iterative feedback with the environment. So if you think that there are crocodiles in a river and you need to get to the other side, maybe you dip your toe in first, right? Maybe you throw some of your food in first and see if the alligators come with you, rather than just jump in. So if there's no cost. At the same time, oftentimes there's a cost to waiting and wasting time. And if you think there are lions on the ground behind you, then you just go in the water. So you're just like, I gotta, screwed if I do or if I don't. So it depends a lot on the circumstances. But if you can test things and reduce the risk of failure, then obviously you get more at bats. And if you get more turns, right, you get more attempts. Because if you put all of your chips on the table on the very first hand and you draw the wrong cards, then you're done. Right, so if you can try that with smaller chips sometimes without any loss, then you can. But again, I don't focus too much on the failure. Everything I do has massive risk of failure. And one of the Cortez burning his ships in battle. It's like one of the greatest motivators for a team is that there's no way out. Like there is no retreat. We will either fight and win, or we will fight and die right here on this battlefield. And that's it. Those are your options. You want to die or you want to win. So, start running hard and start pounding away with your swords. And so I will adopt scenarios in which my alternative is totally unacceptable. And it's like, there's no way that I'm going to allow that to happen. I'm going to make every phone call I can. I'm going to make every single thing happen because I cannot tolerate that loss. So sometimes I'll actually maximize the risk in order to ensure the outcome. But I did break my foot dancing, so...
We are way beyond time, so let me wrap it up this session. We mentioned one or two issues. One of this, remember we're talking about failure, and companies should bet and reward failure. This is the point. I wish many companies did this, and honestly, I have found over my professional life very interesting companies and very interesting projects where, in certain areas, key fields of operation, companies hire people who have failed. And this is a problem we have in Portugal. It's a moral issue, as Patrick put it. So this is the issue. Please do not forget what Paulo Sveto told me, and I mentioned before. Camilo, you have no idea how many projects we launch every year and how many of them fail. That actually you guys from journalism business don't even know about it. So there's risk, there's failure inherent to being an entrepreneur. So, for those of you who are willing to take the risk, don't forget about one key issue. Shoot for the fucking stars. Thank you.